If you've ever heard of the Dyatlov Pass incident, you already know it's one of the most chilling and mysterious cases in modern history. In this video, we're going to break down the full story, what happened to the 9 experienced hikers in the Ural Mountains, the strange evidence found at the scene, and the official explanations that have tried to solve the mystery for decades. We'll go step by step through the events, the discoveries, and the unanswered questions that still don't sit right with many people. Then, at the end of the video, I'll share my personal opinion on what I believe really happened, and trust me, it's not the standard Avalanche theory, so make sure you watch all the way to the end because that's where I'll lay out why I think this case might involve something far more mysterious than we've been told. Picture this, it's 1959, 9 experienced hikers do something that makes no sense. On a desolate frozen slope in Russia's Ural Mountains, they slash their tent open from the inside and run out into the wilderness. Some have no shoes, others no coats, into temperatures of minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 35 degrees Celsius. What could possibly have terrified them so much that they chose a certain frozen death over the safety of their tent? Investigators found no signs of a fight, no footprints from anyone else, just a trail of bizarre clues that point to something deeply unsettling. The official cause of death was a compelling natural force, a statement so vague it just made everything feel more suspicious. For over 60 years, this event, the Dyatlov Pass incident, has been one of history's most chilling and unsolvable mysteries. Tonight, we're going to piece together the evidence, trace the last steps of the doomed expedition, and explore the most disturbing theories, from a secret Soviet weapons test to a face-to-face encounter with an ancient mountain creature. Before their names became tied to tragedy and folklore, they were just kids, full of life. The group that set out on January 23rd, 1959, was made up of 10 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute. They were all seasoned hikers, bonded by a love for the raw beauty of the wilderness. The leader was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, a quiet but confident engineering student who had planned this tough trek. It was a Category 3 expedition, the highest difficulty rating you could get at the time, a true test of their skill and courage. The full group consisted of 8 men and 2 women, a tight-knit crew ready for adventure. There was Zinaida Kolmogorova, known for her resilience, and Lyudmila Luda Dubinina, one of the youngest, but also one of the toughest. There was Rustim Slobodin, the group's mandolin player, Yuri Krivonishenko, whose camera would later give us haunting images of their final days, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, a civil engineering graduate, and Alexander Kolevatov, a nuclear physics student, a detail that would later spark all kinds of speculation. And then there was Semyon Alexander Zolotaryov. At 38, he was the oldest, a mysterious combat veteran with strange tattoos who had joined the group at the last minute. The 10th member was Yuri Yudin, who, by a twist of fate, would be the only one to survive. Their diaries and photos tell a story of a difficult but happy journey. They took a train from Sverdlovsk to Ivdel, then a truck to Vizhai, the last tiny settlement before the vast, empty wilderness. Lyudmila Dubinina's diary from January 23rd captures the energy of their departure. I was packing in such a rush. We were really short of time, but arrived at the railway station with seconds to spare. Before leaving, we sang a few songs. This time, there were a lot of very new songs that we were writing down with the help of an instructor, a Zolotaryov, who came with us on the trek. They were a typical group of young people, teasing each other and singing songs. One diary entry even mentions Yuri Krivonishenko getting briefly detained by police for jokingly singing for spare change at a station. They were in high spirits, aware of the risks, but confident. On January 27th, they started the real trek from Vijay. The very next day, Yuri Yudin's chronic joint pain flared up, forcing him to turn back. It was a decision that saved his life. He said his goodbyes, having no idea he'd be the last person to see his 9 friends alive. The remaining 9 pushed on toward their goal, the peak of Otorten. Their diaries describe the grueling trek. On January 31st, they reached a highland area and built a labaz, a small shelter to store extra food and gear for the return trip, lightening their packs for the final climb. That same day, Dyatlov wrote the last entry. He described how the weather was getting worse as they moved toward a mountain the local Mansi people called Kholat Syakhl. In their language, it means dead mountain, not because of some dark legend, but simply because there was no game to hunt there. Soon, that name would take on a horrifying new meaning. Dyatlov wrote, "Wind is western, warm, piercing, with speed like the jet from airplanes at takeoff. I can't even think of setting up a labaz here. We're exhausted but start setting up for the night. Can't imagine such comfort on the ridge with howling wind outside, hundreds of kilometres away from human settlements." On February 1st, the group started up the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl, but a snowstorm hit, visibility dropped, and they lost their way, drifting westward. Around 5 p.m, they decided to pitch their tent right there on the exposed slope, just 10 miles from their destination. It was a strange choice for experienced hikers who would normally look for shelter down by the tree line only about a mile away. Maybe they were too tired, or maybe they thought the open slope was safer from the wind. Whatever the reason, it was a fateful decision. They ate their last meal between 6 and 7 p.m. and settled in for the night. It was the last moment of peace they would ever know. The group was supposed to send a telegram to their sports club around February 12th. When days passed with no word, people started to worry. On February 20th, a massive search and rescue operation began, involving students, teachers, the army, and local Mansi hunters. On February 26th, a search party found the first clue, the hiker's tent, half collapsed and buried in snow on the side of Kholat Syakhl. But something was very wrong. A flask of vodka, a map, some food, all left behind as if in a sudden panic. And the most disturbing part, the tent had been slashed open from the inside. That meant the hikers were so desperate to get out they couldn't even spare the seconds it would take to untie the entrance. Outside, a trail of footprints led down the slope. The prints, from 8 or 9 people, showed that some were barefoot, others in just socks. They led away from the tent, down toward the forest over a mile away. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, and no footprints other than their own. It was as if they had fled from an invisible terror, running straight into the deadly cold of the night. The next day, searchers followed the tracks to the edge of the woods. There, under a huge Siberian pine, they found the first 2 bodies. Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko were shoeless and dressed only in their underwear. Their hands were burned, and the remains of a small fire were nearby. Branches on the pine tree were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting someone had frantically climbed it, maybe to get a look at the camp, or maybe to escape something on the ground. Between that tree and the camp, they found the next 3 bodies, Igor Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova and Rustem Slobodin. They were found at intervals, their bodies frozen in poses that suggested they were desperately trying to crawl back to the tent. They were dressed a bit better, but still without proper winter gear. The medical exam concluded they had all died of hypothermia. Slobodin also had a small crack in his skull, but at the time it wasn't considered a fatal wound. For 2 long months, no one knew what happened to the other 4 hikers. Then, on May 4th, as the snow began to melt, their bodies were found in a ravine buried under 13 feet of snow, about 250 feet from the pine tree. And it was these last 4 that turned this tragedy into a true enigma. These weren't simple cases of freezing to death. The injuries were catastrophic. Nikolai Tibor Brignol had a massive skull fracture. Semyon Zolotaryov and Lyudmila Dubinina both had crushed chests with multiple broken ribs. A doctor who examined them said the force needed to cause these injuries was like being hit by a car and couldn't have been inflicted by another person. And here's the strangest part. These devastating internal injuries had almost no external wounds. It was as if they had been crushed by some immense invisible pressure, and it got even more grotesque. Lyudmila Dubinina was found missing her tongue, eyes, and parts of her lips. Zolotaryov was missing his eyeballs too. Some of the hikers seemed to have shared clothes. Dubinina's foot was wrapped in a piece of Krivonishenko's pants, and Zolotaryov was wearing Dubinina's coat and hat. This final, horrifying discovery just created more questions. How could some of them freeze to death while others died from violent trauma? What could cause those kinds of specific internal injuries, and what happened to the missing soft tissues? The Soviet investigation that followed was swift and for many completely unsatisfying. They were faced with a puzzle of conflicting evidence: 5 people who clearly froze to death and 4 who died from injuries like you'd see in a high-speed crash or a blast wave. Yet there were no signs of an explosion, and the area didn't show obvious signs of a major avalanche. To make things even weirder, low levels of radiation were found on some of the hikers' clothes. This immediately started rumours of secret military tests. The official explanation was more mundane. Maybe it came from thorium in their lanterns, or from one of the hikers who worked near a nuclear site. The question of the missing eyes and tongue was also explained away. Investigators suggested that because the bodies were found in running water in May, the soft tissues were likely removed by natural decay and scavengers like mice. It was a plausible, if grim, explanation. But the biggest question remained: what made 9 experienced hikers run from their tent in a blind panic? The official inquest couldn't answer that. With no evidence of foul play, no other footprints, no signs of a struggle, they quickly dismissed the idea of an attack by outsiders, like the local Mansi people, who were cooperative and said the area had no special significance to them. After just 3 months, in May 1959, the criminal case was suddenly closed. The final report concluded that the hikers died because of a compelling natural force. This incredibly vague statement did nothing but fuel decades of speculation. What was this force? Why was the conclusion so hazy? The case files were locked away in a secret archive, and the area was closed off for 3 years, cementing the Dyatlov Pass incident as a conspiracy theorist's dream. It was as if the Soviet government either didn't know what happened or it did, and was determined to hide it. The mystery of what happened on Dead Mountain has obsessed people for generations, spawning countless books, documentaries, and late-night internet debates. Before we get into the wild theories, from the scientific to the downright terrifying, take a second to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're all about exploring the world's greatest unsolved mysteries, and you won't want to miss where we go next. Now, let's try to figure out what that compelling natural force might have been. For a long time, the most logical explanation was an avalanche, but the original 1959 investigators weren't convinced. They pointed out that the slope wasn't very steep, there were no classic signs of a snowslide, and the hikers were too smart to camp in an avalanche zone. They even found ski poles standing upright near the tent, which a big avalanche would have definitely knocked over. For years, those arguments made the avalanche theory seem weak, but things changed. In 2020, the Russian Prosecutor General's office reopened the case and came to an official conclusion. An avalanche was the cause. This was backed up in a big way by a super detailed study in 2021 from scientists Johann Gaumer and Alexander Puzrin. Their research tackled all the old arguments. They figured out that while the slope was gentle, the hikers had cut into the snow to level a spot for their tent, creating a small, steep ledge. All night, strong katabatic winds, which are basically rivers of dense cold air flowing downhill, could have piled up snow on the slab just above their camp. The key part of their theory is that this led to a delayed slab avalanche. Hours after they were asleep, the overloaded slab of snow could have fractured and slid right onto the tent. This wouldn't have been a huge, sweeping avalanche, but a smaller, heavy block of snow. The scientists' model showed that a slab like this could hit the sleeping hikers with enough force to cause the exact kind of crushing chest and skull fractures seen on Zolotaryov, Dubinina, and Thibaut Brignol, all without wiping out the campsite. They even used animation code from the Disney movie Frozen and old data from General Motors car crash studies to simulate it. This would explain the panic. Waking up to a sudden crushing weight and the roar of snow, the hikers would have thought a massive avalanche was coming down on them. Trapped in the dark, they would have had no choice but to cut their way out and run downhill to the trees. In the chaos, they got separated. Some were already badly hurt and were likely helped by their friends before they died in the ravine. The others, disoriented and underdressed, quickly froze in the brutal temperatures. The strange phenomenon of paradoxical undressing, where people freezing to death feel hot and take off their clothes, could explain why 2 of them were found in their underwear. While this theory gives a logical chain of events, it doesn't satisfy everyone. Skeptics point out that an avalanche has never been reported in that exact spot since, and some details, like the burned hands and the organised way some tried to return to the tent, still feel odd for a sudden disaster. That brings us to another scientific idea, one that suggests the hikers weren't running from something they saw, but something they felt. This is the infrasound theory. Infrasound is sound at a frequency so low we can't hear it, but our bodies can feel it as a vibration. In labs, it's been shown to cause feelings of intense anxiety, dread, and pure panic. The theory goes that the shape of Kolat's shackle, combined with the fierce winds that night, might have created something called a Kármán vortex street. As wind whipped over the mountain, it could have spun off mini tornadoes that created powerful, silent infrasound waves. These waves would have vibrated through the hikers' bodies, causing irrational terror and a physical feeling of pressure. It would have felt like the mountain itself was attacking them, causing them to bolt from the tent. Once they were far enough away from the source, they might have come to their senses, but by then it was too late. But this theory has its weak spots too. It would mean all 9 of these experienced hikers simultaneously lost their minds so completely that they forgot all their survival training. And while it explains why they fled, it doesn't explain the horrific internal injuries of the 4 found in the ravine. Did they just stumble and fall? It's possible. But the infrasound itself wouldn't have crushed their bones. When the rational explanations don't seem to cover everything, people turn to the darker possibilities of the Cold War. One of the biggest conspiracy theories is that the Dyatlov group were accidental victims of a secret Soviet weapons test. This theory tries to connect some of the most baffling clues: the strange orange lights in the sky, the radiation on their clothes, and those bizarre injuries. Other hikers and locals reported seeing strange orange spheres or lights in the sky in that region around the same time. For theorists, this points to one thing: a secret military test. The area was, in fact, close to known military testing sites. The theory is that the hikers either wandered into a test zone or saw something they were never supposed to see. What kind of weapon? Some believe it was a concussion or parachute mine, an airburst weapon that creates a powerful shockwave. This could cause massive internal damage, like crushed ribs and fractured skulls, without leaving shrapnel or much of a mark on the outside. A sudden deafening blast and pressure wave would have also been more than enough to cause a panicked flight from the tent. Another version of this theory involves chemical agents. One researcher suggested a failing missile could have released a cloud of corrosive rocket fuel over their camp. Exposure to a chemical like that could cause pain, confusion, and blindness, leading to a desperate escape. It might even explain the strange orange tan found on some of the victims' skin. The radiation found on the clothes is often seen as the smoking gun for this theory. If they were near a radiological or dirty bomb test, that would explain it. After the incident, the Soviet authorities would have classified everything and covered it up, leading to that vague, compelling natural force conclusion. Some even point out that the criminal case file was dated February 6th, long before the hikers were even officially missing, as proof the government knew what happened. But the evidence is all circumstantial. No bomb fragments were ever officially found, though some researchers claim to have found scrap metal in the area years later. The radiation levels were low and could be explained away, and the Soviet government never declassified any documents confirming a military accident there that night. It remains a tantalizing and plausible scenario, but one without any real proof. If the military theory is the most politically charged, our last theory is the most primal and terrifying. It's the idea that the hikers came face to face with something not of our recognised world, the Russian Yeti. This isn't just some modern fantasy. The local Mansi people have ancient legends of a creature called the Menk, a tall, hairy, ape-like wild man that roams the Ural Mountains. These stories describe the Menk as incredibly strong and ferocious. So what connects this legend to the hikers? For those who believe, the clues are chilling. First, there's a line from a satirical newsletter the hikers wrote on their last night. In recent years, there has been a heated debate about the existence of the Yeti. Latest evidence indicates that the Yeti lives in the northern Urals. It was probably a joke, but it shows the idea was on their minds. Then there's the photo. One of the last pictures taken on Krivonischenko's camera is a blurry, haunting image. When you enhance it, it looks like a dark, tall, humanoid figure standing among the trees. Is it just another hiker in a bad photo? Or is it something else, something watching them? The nature of the injuries also fuels this theory. The kind of raw terror that would drive 9 survival experts into a blizzard could have been triggered by seeing a large, aggressive creature. The high broken branches on the cedar tree suggest someone was desperately trying to escape something on the ground, and those injuries, the immense force needed to crush ribs and skulls, are exactly what a powerful animal or hominid could do. And here's the most disturbing part. Mansi legends specifically say that the Menk rips out the tongues of its victims. The fact that Lyudmila Dubinina was found with her tongue missing is, for believers, the most compelling piece of evidence. While scavengers are the official explanation, the specificity of this detail in the old folklore is hard to just brush aside. Did the hikers accidentally trespass on its territory? Suddenly, the name Dead Mountain feels a lot more sinister. Of course, the Yeti theory is pure speculation. The biggest argument against it is the lack of physical evidence. There were no non-human footprints, no animal hair, and no signs of a fight with a large predator. The photo is inconclusive, and the missing tongue can be explained by natural decay. Still, the theory persists, tapping into our primal fear of the unknown. So, where does that leave us? More than 6 decades later, the Dyatlov Pass incident is still a profound and unsettling mystery. We have a tent slashed from the inside, a panicked barefoot flight into a blizzard, bodies that died from both cold and from injuries of incredible force, and a government that closed the case with an answer that explained nothing. The modern avalanche theory offers a logical, scientific chain of events. For many, this is the most likely solution, a tragic accident where everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and yet, even its supporters admit they can't be 100% certain. And so, the other theories linger, filling the gaps that science can't quite close. The infrasound theory gives a reason for the panic, the military theory gives a motive for a cover-up, and the Yeti theory speaks to our deepest fears of what might be lurking in the dark. Perhaps the enduring power of the Dyatlov Pass story is that it forces us to accept ambiguity. It reminds us that there are forces in this world, both natural and perhaps otherwise, that we just don't understand. It's a story about the fragility of human life against the power of the wilderness, and the even more terrifying power of the unknown. The 9 hikers were adventurers, scientists, and friends. They went looking for a challenge and found a fate that continues to fascinate and horrify the world. Their story has become a modern legend, a chilling testament to a mystery that will likely never be fully put to rest. What do you believe happened on that frozen slope? What was the compelling natural force that claimed their lives? Share your theories in the comments below. So, here are my thoughts. When I think about the Dyatlov Pass incident, I don't see a simple accident caused by snow or human error. I see the possibility of something far more unsettling, something that doesn't fit neatly into official explanations. The tragedy that unfolded in 1959 in the northern Ural Mountains has been framed for decades around natural causes, most commonly the avalanche theory. but I do not believe that explanation holds up under scrutiny. In my view, it is completely possible that the group encountered something unknown, perhaps even something the local Mansi people had spoken about in their legends, a Yeti-like creature said to roam the remote wilderness. The idea of an unknown being in that vast, isolated region may sound extreme, but when you examine the details of the case, the standard Avalanche explanation begins to feel less convincing. The tent was found partially collapsed, yes, but skis were still standing upright nearby. If a powerful avalanche had swept through, those skis should have been buried or scattered. The slope itself did not show the kind of massive snow displacement you would expect from a deadly slide. An avalanche capable of forcing 9 experienced hikers to slash their way out of their shelter in panic would have left far more obvious destruction. Instead, the scene suggests sudden fear, not crushing snow. Then there are the injuries. Some of the hikers suffered severe trauma, fractured ribs and skull damage, without the kind of external wounds typically associated with blunt force impacts from tumbling debris. One of the most disturbing details is that a few victims were found without their tongues, and traces of blood were present in their stomachs, indicating the injuries occurred before death. Avalanches do not selectively remove tongues. Snow does not explain that. To me, this points toward a violent encounter rather than an environmental accident. There were also burn marks on some of the hikers' hands, suggesting attempts to start fires after fleeing the tent. If an avalanche had buried them, it likely would have buried them together or trapped them near the site. Instead, they fled in different directions, as if escaping something actively pursuing or threatening them. Their footprints, preserved in the snow for some distance, indicate they left the tent in an organised but urgent manner. It feels less like they were escaping a collapsing slope and more like they were trying to distance themselves from an immediate living threat. And then there is the photograph reportedly found among their belongings, a blurry image of a dark figure standing among the trees. Some dismiss it as one of the hikers or a trick of light and shadow, but I see it as a potential clue. In a remote region known in local folklore for mysterious, towering beings, the idea that they encountered something unknown cannot be completely ruled out. The Mansi people had long told stories of wild, powerful creatures inhabiting those mountains. While folklore alone is not proof, it is interesting that such legends predate the incident. I am not claiming certainty, I am saying the possibility deserves consideration. The hikers were experienced, resilient and familiar with harsh conditions. For them to abandon shelter in sub-zero temperatures without proper clothing suggests terror beyond the fear of snow. Something drove them out, something fractured bones with immense force, something may have attacked them, whether it was a cryptid unknown to modern science, an undiscovered species adapted to extreme climates, or something else entirely. I believe the evidence leaves room for the conclusion that they encountered and were hunted by something not yet understood. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century, and while official reports lean toward natural explanations, I cannot dismiss the possibility that the truth lies in an encounter with something far more mysterious lurking in the wilderness.